今年做才不进了。今年是没咋得那培养的哈，比去年只要多蛮多。你阿得要清高点子。这经已经被我吹吹的。哎，不对了，你这个。Last year, I received a message from a friend who lived in Yunnan province, offering to make a Georgian Qvevri from a cellar. Now half a year has passed, and this very impressive looking fellow has finally arrived in my vineyard. Arguably, there has never been anyone in China who's made a real Qvevri in the Georgian style. Although we have had a long history making wine with amphoria-looking vessels buried underground. What I'm standing next to is probably the first Georgian Qvevri ever made in China. The fundamental quality of a Qvevri is to hold water perfectly tight. Before being laid into a hole on the ground, there are a few things to be done, and water testing is one of them. One thing you might have noticed is that, unlike the Qvevri in Georgia, which are like spineless watermelons rolling on the ground without a purpose, mine is surprisingly able to stand on its own. The difference is, this one has got a slightly flat bottom, which allows it to sit on the spinning stool when being made by hand, and to sit upright in the kiln when being burned. Whereas the Georgians make terracotta products without rotating them in high speed. Spinning in high speed so that they could be made by hand into perfect round shapes. In practice, however, from a winemaker's point of view, the smaller the flat area on the bottom, the more efficient the sediment of pomace will be during fermentation, and consequently, the easier the crystal clear wine body can be siphoned out of the vessel. The masters of France and Italy will be horrified to see what I'm going to do next. The modern wine industry relies on stainless steel tanks for fermentation, whereas I make use of a technique that's been the same for 8,000 years. That's a terracotta Qvevri with a waxed interior. Waxing, not in the same sense you're familiar with in a spa and massage parlor, but is the process to apply melted beeswax to the interior of our old friend, the Qvevri. This coating of beeswax should be just good enough to prevent the porous vessel from breathing vigorously, so that the wine could be stored and aged for as long as 3 to 5 years underground. But it shouldn't be so good that the wine doesn't breathe at all, like in a modern stainless steel tank. People often ask me what are my ingredients in making this particular type of wine. The answer is there are two. Grapes from my vineyard over there, and beeswax produced locally from our village. Both have existed in this part of China for thousands of years or more. To me, beeswax has always had this most delicious flavor, particularly when burnt. Oh, the smell I know and like. Since the Qvevri is fixed into the hole with a mixture of gravel, clay and quicklime, to enhance the fragile object, a little bit of a protection net is required. Oh. 好，再下一路雨露嘞，往别人来顶。行，我这边开始嘞。 大师就为了卷，也有开的，为了改个绿去了。小心我当然来绿来，那个改路去了。A point of enology needs to be placed in before I continue. The extremely high quality wine comes from an extremely slow process of alcoholic fermentation. And a slow alcoholic fermentation requires a lower temperature than we'd expect. 100 years ago, before thermostating was possible, making great wine in France and Italy was a matter of chance. When Septembers and Octobers were too hot, the masters had to cover their fermentation tanks with ice cubes, only to save a portion of their production of the year. In 1982, Bordeaux in France had a historically dry and hot growing season. The grapes reached complete ripeness in early September, at which time it was still summer, and the temperature was unusually high. On September the 16th, Chateau Lafite Rothschild decided to harvest at the grapes' prime. Because the chateau was already rich enough at the time, they were equipped with temperature controlling systems on their tanks. Unfortunately, most of the other farmers were not so well equipped. Eventually, they had to ferment the grapes literally in summer, fumbling with ice cubes and water pipes around their tanks. It ended disastrously for the rest. But the 1982 Chateau Lafite Rothschild became the greatest legend for half a century. It was so famous that there are more bottles of 1982 Lafite Rothschild available for sale in the Chinese market today than ever being produced in that year. Today, I still don't use thermostats in my cellar. By burying the Qvevri into the ground, a consistently cool environment is sustained for the fermentation. But are there any flaws with the Qvevri despite all the advantages? Yes, there are two. First, with the Qvevri you must use wild yeast instead of cultivated yeast to ferment the grapes. Otherwise, it'd be like fitting a super engine into a 1960s vintage car. The result is uncomfortable and dangerous. But wild yeasts are utterly unpredictable, hence impossible for industrialization. And two, the cleaning of the Qvevri's aftermath every year. It's a painful experience. No modern winemaker is ever prepared for it.